The 1st of June 1967, Mossad's director, Major General Meir Amit Slutsky, walked into the office of Robert McNamara, the US Secretary of Defense. He had one pivotal question to ask. He had traveled thousands of miles just to receive the answer to this question. He picked his moment carefully and then bluntly asked, "I am going to recommend to my government that it launch an offensive against Egypt. Can you assure me that the USA wouldn't react negatively to this?" Obviously, Amit had the 1956 war in mind when the USA had lambasted Israel and its allies as aggressors and forced the war to a premature end from the Israeli point of view. McNamara quietly provided the assurance and said that he would inform President Johnson himself. He then merely asked how long the war was expected to last and what casualties Israel might incur. That was it. The die was cast. Amit had obtained the permission he sought. Now Israel could freely use the element of surprise and catch the Arabs with their pants down. Indeed, as McNamara was assuring Amit, almost all the Arab capitals were in touch with Washington, as the latter had indicated that it would help resolve the crisis over the Straits of Tiran peacefully. How foolish, how naive, how gullible they were. I am Dr. Hassan Bukhari, and this is the 16th episode of our series, Palestine versus Israel. At the end of the last episode, we had discussed the rising tensions between Syria and Israel that had brought the Arab world to the brink of another war with Israel by May 1967. On May 12, amidst Israeli Independence Day celebrations, Israel warned Syria that if it continued its military activities on the border, Israel would launch decisive military action with the aim of overthrowing the Syrian regime. The next day, Jamal Abdel Nasser received an alarming secret message from the Russians. It was reported that Israel had massed its troops on the Syrian border and was ready for a decisive strike. Later, it was found out that the information was inaccurate and that Moscow hadn't authorized that message. But by then it was too late. Nasser had already set a chain of events in motion through his response to this faulty information. On May 14, Nasser mobilized his army and sent large forces into the Sinai. 5 days later, he expelled the United Nations Emergency Force from Gaza and Sharm el-Sheikh. Finally, on 22nd May, the Egyptians occupied coastal positions at Sharm el-Sheikh and closed the Straits of Tiran to ships destined for the Israeli port of Eilat. One might ask why Nasser did all this in stages. Why did he hesitate before closing the Straits of Tiran? Actually, Nasser wanted to keep his options for political maneuvering open. Israel had declared in 1957 that it would consider any future closure of the Straits of Tiran an act of war, and the USA had seconded it then. Nasser didn't want war, but after expelling the United Nations Emergency Force, he was taunted again by the Saudis and Jordanians that he was afraid of Israel. So, in order to regain his prestige, he closed the Straits of Tiran. This fatal decision was taken due to reasons other than Nasser's prestige as well. Nasser's generals, and to a lesser extent Nasser himself as well, believed that if war broke out, Egypt could hold out defensively for some days and then the international community would jump in to arrest the crisis with a ceasefire. On the other hand, if war was somehow averted, Nasser would gain valuable political capital by standing eye to eye with Israel without blinking and regaining control of the Straits of Tiran in the process. Some historians have indicated that Nasser wasn't in total control of his own army, which was being run almost as a private fiefdom of the army chief Abdul Hakim Amir. Amir and his sycophants lived in a dream world and even indulged in fantasies of defeating Israel through blitzkrieg-like offensives. Nasser was also misled by lies uttered by his officials. Charles Smith writes, "Unknown at the time was the likelihood that Nasser did not control his army, whose leaders were more eager for war than he. Nasser's real goal was to achieve a clear political victory in the cause of Arabism that would deflate Syrian pretensions and send news of his own militancy to the chanceries and streets of the Arab world. He occupied Sharm el-Sheikh to blunt Arab criticism, not as a prelude to an offensive. He stressed defensive preparations and insisted that Egyptian forces in the Sinai adopt a defensive posture, albeit in forward offensive positions. The confusion probably reflected his military chief's desire for war. His war minister, Shamsuddin Badran, returned from Moscow on May 25 and lied to Nasser, telling him that he had Soviet backing for war, when in fact Moscow was desperately urging restraint. As Nasser wanted the army to maintain a defensive posture, but Amir wanted to take the offensive, confusion resulted. In the end, the Egyptian army was caught in a position when it could do neither. There was another reason why Nasser panicked and jumped the gun when the false Soviet report about the impending Israeli attack on Syria reached him. Nasser knew that the Syrian army was monumentally incompetent and would be smashed by the Israelis very quickly. Howard Saka mentions, during their visits in April and May of 1967, the Egyptian military missions were shocked by the condition of the Syrian army, the low caliber of its officers. The disarray should not have been surprising, actually, for each of the numerous Syrian revolutions had liquidated a full echelon of commanders. Yet, an attempt now to dispatch forces to Syrian soil would take far too long. Nasser decided instead to concentrate the bulk of his army in the Sinai Peninsula, a move that would relieve any potential Israeli threat against Syria, gratify the Russians, nonplus the Americans, and perhaps once and for all disarm his Arab critics. On May 30, 1967, King Hussein of Jordan, having lost all faith in his Western allies, visited Cairo and unexpectedly signed a joint defense pact with Nasser. He placed his forces under the command of Egyptian General Abdul Munim Riyad. Now the Arab lineup for war was complete. Interestingly, the alliance was so rife with disunity that two members, that is Syria and Jordan, weren't even maintaining diplomatic relations with each other then. An excerpt from the book, The 1967 Arab-Israeli War, Origins and Consequences, is apt here. The Arab coalition facing Israel in this war was one of the most ill-prepared and bitterly divided coalitions in the history of modern warfare, with the exception of the Arab Front in the 1948 war. As in the war for Palestine, the inability of the Arabs to coordinate their military and diplomatic strategies was a major factor in their ultimate defeat. With Jordan and Syria not even on talking terms, and 1/3 of the Egyptian army stuck in the Yemenian quagmire, Arabs placed hopes in their Soviet weapons. Granted, the Soviet weapons were plentiful, but Israelis had a clear edge when it came to the quality of weapons, especially weapons designed to facilitate offensives. John Glassman writes in his book Arms for the Arabs, the Soviet Union and War in the Middle East, Moscow provided weapons designed for defensive or limited offensive purposes, but not sufficient to allow contemplation of successful first strike or total victory. In contrast, the Israeli arsenal possessed significant offensive capabilities, including long-range attack bombers. The Israelis, on the other hand, had no illusions. They knew that they could demolish the Arab armies in the field. In the words of Trevor Dupire, Israeli military and political leaders were well aware of the qualitative superiority of their forces over the neighboring Arab military forces, and also recognized something that went unnoticed by most of the rest of the world, and was not given sufficient attention even by the Arabs. They had nearly as many first-line troops as the combined Arab forces. Although the Arabs had an advantage in major weapons, there was no doubt in the minds of Israeli military leaders that their own troops were technologically more sophisticated, or that they would be victorious in the event of another conflict. But they were apprehensive about the global opinion. They wanted the USA to back them before embarking on war. They didn't want the fruits of their military victory snatched away, like in 1956. They also didn't want Nasser to gain another political triumph. The military leadership of Israel didn't even want to wait for US clearance. They criticized Prime Minister Eshkol for his diplomatic efforts. They wanted a political leadership who would grasp the opportunity provided by Nasser's closure of the Straits of Tiran immediately. Many of them hoped for expansion of Israel's borders and resumption of Jewish control over Jerusalem after more than a millennium. Another reason why many in Israel advocated an immediate attack was that Nasser was not trying to defuse the crisis. He had maintained contacts with the Americans, and on the 2nd of June, it was announced that Nasser's Vice President Zakaria Mohiuddin would visit Washington to negotiate an end to the crisis on 7 June. After this announcement, even those who were advocating restraint, like the Israeli Foreign Minister Abba Eban, began recommending an immediate attack. Eban later said, "It was probable that this initiative would aim at a face-saving compromise, and that the face to be saved would be Nasser's, not Israel's. For us, the importance of denying Nasser political and psychological victory had become no less important than the concrete interest involved in the issue of navigation." Unknown to the Arabs, though, was the fact that one day before the announcement of Mohiuddin's visit, the USA had given Israel the green light to launch a massive preemptive strike and kindle the flames of war. It is mentioned in the book, The 1967 Arab-Israeli War, Origins and Consequences, that McNamara recognized that America had a moral responsibility to open the straits, but he preferred Israel to do it, because America was tied down in Vietnam, and because the Central Intelligence Agency estimated that Israel could defeat the Egyptian army without any outside help. In effect, he gave Israel a green light to launch a preemptive strike against Egypt. Israeli Prime Minister Eshkol also came around to sanctioning a preemptive strike after receiving the nod and the wink from the US President Lyndon Johnson. According to the historian Charles Smith, the Israeli wish to attack and their assurances regarding the future peace process were approved directly and indirectly by an American president through personal intermediaries and counselors who were themselves sympathetic to Israel, not via official channels or after discussion with the specialists on the region. The shameful American duplicity of deceiving the gullible Arabs by luring them with the promises of facilitating a disengagement from the crisis, while simultaneously giving Israel the go-ahead to launch a devastating surprise attack, is one of the most glaring examples in post-World War II history of bad faith and dissimulation. After the war, Muhammad al-Farah, the Jordanian ambassador to the UN, told a group of Arab UN officials and diplomats that he felt he had been the victim of American duplicity in the run-up to the war. According to him, Ambassador Goldberg, US ambassador to the UN at that time, had conveyed to Arab ambassadors that the United States was mediating with Israel to defuse the crisis and would restrain it from attacking. He urged them to counsel restraint to their governments. Concurrently, the Johnson administration had given Israel the go-ahead for its surprise attack just before Egypt's vice president arrived in Washington for negotiations to resolve the crisis. The Arab ambassadors had been used to deceive their governments, while Israel prepared its first strike with US approval. Some have tried to justify US duplicity by pointing out that Arab propaganda before the 1967 war had convinced many in the West that Israel faced mortal peril. So, any and all means to support Israel in this time of mortal peril even if they involved bad faith and deception, were justified. All I can say here is that justification isn't hard to find when one is determined to find it. The fact of the matter is that both the US and Israelis knew that Arab propaganda was extremely hollow and was only meant to cater to domestic audiences. But one cannot deny that the Arab rulers were extremely stupid to issue such propaganda while knowing full well that they lacked the means and capability to emerge victorious in a war against Israel. Finally, on the 4th of June 1967, the Israeli cabinet approved Defense Minister Moshe Dayan's plan to hit Egypt with a lightning strike the following day. Despite all attempts at secrecy, the CIA became aware of the exact time of the Israeli strike. Jack O'Connell, the CIA station chief in Amman, came to know this information during the evening of 4th June. O'Connell was a friend of King Hussein, and he promptly informed him that the Israelis were going to attack Egypt's air force and airfields the following morning at 8 a.m. King Hussein sent this information to Jamal Abdel Nasser, urging him to take precautions and be ready. Bizarrely, Nasser ignored this information. When the Israelis attacked the next morning, the whole Egyptian air force was a sitting duck. It was odd that after uttering so many bombastic statements and witnessing a prolonged and ongoing crisis, the Arabs were caught napping. After 10 years of preparation for what was often referred to as the Battle of Destiny, and after raising popular passions to a fever pitch with their bombastic rhetoric, the leaders of the confederation states were caught by complete surprise when Israel took their threats at face value and landed the first blow on Monday, 5 June. The 6-day war had erupted. The Middle East was never going to be the same again. We will discuss the 6-day war of 1967 in detail in the next episode of Palestine versus Israel. Stay tuned, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel.